Hello everyone, and welcome to this Kids Matter Early Childhood webinar, Top Tips for Helping Young Children Manage Their Emotions. Thanks so much for attending today. I'm Sarah Richardson and I'm a facilitator with Kids Matter Early Childhood based in South Australia. It's great that many of you are able to join us either for this live event or for watching later on, watching a recording later on. Some of you might already be closely connected with Kids Matter initiatives. For those who haven't been, Kids Matter Early Childhood is an initiative funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue. It's grown into what it is today through partnership between Early Childhood Australia, Beyond Blue and the Australian Psychological Society. Joining us today are Penny Anderson from Tasmania. Hi Penny.
Oh hi, good to be with you.
And Janelle from the ACT. Hello Janelle.
Hi Sarah. Hi everybody.
I'm really looking forward to hearing from Penny and Janelle about the ways we can support children to manage emotions. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that today, through this webinar, we're meeting on traditional lands of many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Here in Adelaide, I'm on Kaurna land, and I want to pay respect to elders past and present for their continuing custodianship of this land and the children of this land across the generations. I also ask today that as we learn with Penny and Janelle about the top tips to help young children manage emotions, we keep in mind the history and traditions of thousands of years and draw on the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who use this land, connection to place, culture and ancestors to understand and to support the regulation of emotions. So I can already see that people are starting to tell us where they're from in the chat and start connecting with each other. It will be great to continue that conversation with each other in the chat, and also we'll draw on some of your questions or thoughts in the chat as well, so I look forward to chatting with you there. Just as we begin this conversation, I'd really like to remind all of us to take care of yourself, but also of each other. You can learn a little bit more about being safe and self-care with our Kids Matter resources, and the link there is on the announcement down the bottom, and you can access that on our website. And just finally, before we really get into the really good information that we're going to hear from Penny and Janelle today, I just want to give you a few tips about managing the space we're in. So you'll see the chat over on the left-hand side. Join in with that if you're interested in chatting with us or with each other. You can also get rid of the chat if that just is a distraction and you don't want to see that. If you're having trouble with connection, the phone number to contact and connect via phone will be also in the chat. And Michelle will be available on the chat to help you with any of those technical kind of issues. We'll also have some polls during the session where we can find out some information from you. So really keen for you to join in on those. You can also access a lot of these resources on our website, so we'll give you some links to those. I just want to remind you too that you'll be able to get a copy of the recordings of the resources later on, and also your certificate, which lots of you are really keen to get as well, probably about a week after the chat, after the webinar and our conversation. So I think that's all I need to let you know about now, so we can get started. I'll hand over to Penny and Janelle, who not only have a wealth of knowledge and experience in this topic, but they also are considerably passionate about this as well. So I know that we're all going to learn a lot from them. And I'll see you all again during the polls and also later on at the end of the webinar. So look forward to hearing from Penny and Janelle.
Hi, it's Penny speaking. Today's webinar is an opportunity to explore children's ability to manage their emotions and to outline how we as adults can help them to do this. And we know this is a complex, emotion-charged area of our work. So we're going to start by asking you what your concerns are, and hopefully many will be addressed. Next, we will briefly identify the learning outcomes we have for the webinar, and then we will talk about why emotions are so significant, connect this with brain research, and follow on with ways to understand emotions. We will watch a video of an educator in action with a distressed child, which we hope many of you have managed to preview, and focus on what she does in order to illustrate approaches that work. And finally, we will draw together our discussion, talk about the critical role of adults in this area of children's learning, and summarise a group of top tips for helping young children to manage their emotions. We hope this summary will provide you with a clear way to think about and frame what you understand so that your ideas can be acted upon. So let's now think about your concerns, what your concerns are about this topic. We're going to move to a poll, and do a poll, and have a look at those points on the screen and think about what concerns you most about supporting children to manage their emotions. You can highlight more than one area if you wish, and not knowing what to do worries a lot of people. Knowing how to respond to strong emotions, talking to children about their emotions, finding a balance between being a friend and being the adult in charge, keeping all children safe, knowing how to allocate time fairly, having enough relevant training, or anything else which we haven't included there. If there's something that you would like to add, you can put that in the chat, and let's just have a look and see what are the concerns that people seem to have.
It's interesting, Penny, isn't it, that people don't know how to manage or find it more difficult when the feelings are really big or really strong?
Yes, it is interesting that one is coming up, yeah, with 77% showing that that's an area of concern.
Yeah, and remember you can choose more than one, because there's not always only one thing that people struggle with. It's when those feelings get really big that we get a bit overwhelmed, I think.
That's right.
As parents and as educators.
And a close second is talking to children about their emotions and keeping all the children safe.
Yes. And it's that notion of we have to spend the same time on every child, and that can often lead us into great difficulty. And trying to talk through that with others and understand that is really important.
Yeah, it is tricky, isn't it, when you go away at the end of the day and you think you spent all your time on one or two children and all the other children have missed out. And you feel like that's not fair.
Sometimes just, and you go away and you think about that child all the time as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so what we've got to try and do is to think of how we can build a total environment that is supportive of everyone, and it's not just us doing all the supporting. And how we do that is quite complex.
There's also something coming up in the chat around our work with children, but then also how we transfer that to perhaps to their parents or their...
Yes. Okay, well, thank you for your contributions. Well, clearly, the sort of things that you're highlighting are the kinds of things that we've been thinking about. So we'll move on then to think about what our aims are, the learning outcomes for this session. So we've got... we know that all of you are at different stages, and all of us are at different stages in our professional lives. So some of the information we cover may or may not be new to you. And we encourage you to use the chat box if you want to share your ideas, and we look forward to your contribution to these learning outcomes. And we hope your participation in the webinar will help you to first understand why emotions are so important in children's mental health and wellbeing, development and learning. And then secondly, in what ways brain research has provided evidence for effective practice. And then to know what strategies support young children to positively manage their emotions, and what Kids Matter and other resources can contribute to this knowledge. And just remember that you will get a copy of these slides, as Sarah said, and the recording, and a list of resources which we put together a few days after the webinar, and that will help you continue on your journey. And in the next slide, Janelle will link with our second learning outcome and explain in what ways brain research has provided us with much more evidence for our practice.
Hello everybody, it's Janelle here. I'm going to talk about the significance of emotions, and I'm using this picture of a brain to support what I'm talking about. And one effective way to understand the significance is to look at how the brain works. Dr. Dan Siegel is one of a number of people who's done extensive research in this area over the past decade or so, and has shared information in a way that everyone can benefit. And we've referenced one of his books that's called The Whole Brain Child. And the brain in the centre of this picture is from the Whole Brain Child book. He talks about imagining the brain as having an upstairs and a downstairs. The downstairs is nearer the spine and is more primitive, develops earlier, and controls many of the functions that keep us alive, like breathing, heart rate, and sleep. This is also where the flight, fight, freeze response exists, a response seen when people feel threatened. And the people talking about helping children deal with big emotions, sometimes those big emotions come from that fight or flight area downstairs in the brain. The upstairs brain, near the top of your head, develops later on and controls thinking, reasoning, executive functioning, play, and body control. Managing or regulating behaviour and emotion requires access to this upstairs brain. This can be blocked temporarily when someone's experiencing huge positive or huge negative emotions. The emotional brain sits somewhere in the middle, but it sounds throughout the brain as well. Many people have heard of the left and right hemisphere of the brain. The left brain carries out the logical, literal, linear, linguistic function, while the right brain grasps the meaning of the left brain information by reading the body language, facial expressions, voice tone, and emotion. So the emotional brain is in the centre right. You often hear of the logical left brain and the emotional right brain. Memories are held in various areas of the brain, and this is where the knowledge is stored. Areas and functions in the brain are connected vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. And chemicals like oxytocin is released when you're calm, and cortisol is released when you're stressed. And they either help or hinder these connections. Chemicals are activated by experiences people have and either strengthen or weaken the connection. The most important experience that anybody can have is the quality and pattern of close relationships. As the emotional brain is situated centrally, all these connections pass through it. All areas of the brain are moderated and affected by the emotional brain. Close relationships are both bathed in emotion and provide the skills and the support for emotional regulation. Imagine the emotional brain as being like a filter for incoming and outgoing information. For example, an event can impact on both the downstairs and the upstairs brain, so it can affect both your breathing and your thinking at the same time. If you have an unconscious negative memory of dogs, for example, and a dog runs towards you, you may hold your breath, breathe, and temporarily lose access to that problem-solving ability and thinking brain upstairs. The younger a child, the more chronic the stressful events are, the greater the impact is on the brain. It's really useful to use this growing bank of knowledge around how the brain works to guide working with children, with people, but particularly young children. The aim is to be able to use all the areas of the brain, and this is especially important when managing and regulating emotions. Dan Siegel says the brain is constantly seeking balance and integration. It's constantly trying to link between the upstairs and the downstairs, the left and the right, and the memory. Integration enables the left and right-hand brain to work as a team, and the upstairs and downstairs brain to support each other. One of Dan's ideas to connect the upstairs and downstairs brain is, in inverted commas, move it to lose it, which really resonates with our idea of children needing regular movement in order to learn and grow. Disconnected brains could result in an interesting society where people are either always flooded with huge emotion or devoid of any emotion. Connections between the left and right offers people a way to experience and express emotion in a way that seems appropriate. The chemicals released through positive and negative experiences, including relationships, determine how well these connections work together. This can also impact on the way a child's temperament influences their life. And in a moment, we'll see the video that will show us what this looks like. So, understanding emotions. Educators often report how they're becoming increasingly concerned with the challenging behaviours in early childhood settings. A recent Exchange Everyday article quoted from a book written by Forrester and Albrecht that educators are noticing an increase in difficult and challenging behaviours in young children, and experienced educators are saying they are faced with behaviours that don't seem responsive to techniques that have worked before. The results in the poll that we just did show that there are concerns in this area. And of course, you may be listening today in part because this field is of interest to you. You would be aware that behaviour is closely related to emotions, so exploring how to manage emotions will in turn impact on a child's behaviour. As the incredible Ian says, when we talk about managing emotions, what we're really referring to is managing behaviour, as children express their emotions through their behaviour. The flyer for this particular webinar stated, emotions are central to learning, and knowing how to manage and respond to emotions in positive ways are skills that impact all areas of life. You could see in the previous slide the significance of emotions and how all areas of our brain and lives are influenced by emotions. Emotions help and hinder our learning. They colour how we feel and think about ourselves, our world, and the people in it. Educators can be responding to the emotions of many children or the same child many times a day, in addition to all the routine requirements. And you know how exhausting that can be. We've adapted the Kids Matter graphic on the next slide to add further understanding to where emotions fit in our world. Kids Matter research has clarified that children's social and emotional learning is linked to good mental health and better life outcomes. And this graphic represents the interconnectedness of a child's sense of self and social emotional capacity and how this is embedded within their social and cultural context in the purpose circle around the outside. Each of the elements do have their own characteristics, but they are so closely interrelated. Behaviours or skills that we refer to as appropriate or inappropriate depend on the social and cultural context that children, families and institutions experience. If you're interested in this, the Kids Matter Early Childhood webinar number 4 goes into more detail. The way a child thinks and feels about themselves is strongly related to how they recognise, express and regulate their emotions and how they interact with others. A child expresses what they're feeling and thinking and needing through what they do, through their behaviour. And an adult's response to a child's behaviour is a key factor as to how the child manages their behaviour and emotions. And Penny will expand more about this in a moment.
Right, well, we're going to watch a video in a minute, but just to start, have a little talk before we start. All of us in our work or our parenting have already used strategies to help young children to manage their emotions. And as a grandparent living with a 2.5-year-old and a 1-year-old, this is currently a very real experience for me. The video clip, which we're about to watch, is taken from the Kids Matter website and is part of the rich suite of professional learning resources on mental health and wellbeing now available to early childhood educators on this site. And as you watch, please remember that this is a record of the everyday action of an educator with no time for preparation or rehearsal, and it is courageous that she agreed to be filmed in action and have this shared widely on the web. If you've not previewed it and for some reason you can't see it on your screen, don't worry too much, as we will talk through much of its content, and you can use the link later to watch it and recall the discussion we had. In the clip, we'll see the educator assisting a distressed child. As you watch this, reflect on your own actions and how effective they are when something like this occurs, on your beliefs and how they might influence these actions, and try to put yourself in the role of this educator. Identify the actual things that she does that help this young child to manage her emotions, and use the chat if you want to share what you noticed. So what did the educator actually do that helped this child to calm down? Let's watch the video.
Can I help you? Come on. Come on. You ready? I'll give you a nice big hug. Lil. No. That's really upset you, hasn't it? Actually, you look upset. Come on. Come on. Big breath. Big breath. Goodness me. What happened there? Big breath. You okay? You feeling okay now? Yeah. Big cuddles always make you feel better, don't they? No, they make me feel better. You still a bit sad? You want to tell me what happened? You're not letting go, are you? Deep breath. Want to talk about it now? No. No, that's okay. We don't have to. We might need to get you a tissue though. What happened? That was a bit extreme. Do you feel better now? She's all right.
She just ran me over.
He ran you over? That's no good.
Look at this, Kate. It's a garbage truck.
It is a garbage truck. Now you're okay, aren't you? Shall we go get you a tissue and maybe a drink of water?
I can see from the comments that some people are putting in the chat that there are things that you're raising that we certainly have seen and observed in this clip. And one of them was about managing to control your own feelings in situations when a child is showing very strong feelings, and we know how important that is. But we're going to highlight four areas in the interaction that are really supported by the research as being particularly helpful. And the first one of those is that the actual beliefs, strengths and understandings of the educator And the second one is connecting, how she actually connected. And the third one, emotional literacy. And fourth, telling the story. So they're the 4 points that we would like to highlight. So first, let's have a look at the educator's beliefs, strengths and understanding, and what she's also getting, the support she's getting from her colleagues. So when we watch the video, the child's behaviour is really the only thing that both we and the educator can actually see. But given the educator's actions, it's reasonable for us to assume that she used what she could see to interpret, think about and wonder what had happened socially and emotionally for the child and how the child's sense of self was being influenced by this, while at the same time she took immediate action to provide support. And this is an example of the many times during the day that every educator working with young children has to stop and think, reflect on their own knowledge and beliefs and take appropriate action, often at a very quick pace, and give the child time to do the same. Very exhausting, we know. The Stop, Reflect, Act is a core practice in the Kids Matter framework, and it reminds us how important it is that educators have enough knowledge in their minds to give them a framework for action. There is no time when they're in action for them to go and get the book to check what they should be doing. We also know that when educators as a group are consistent in their approach and support each other, that there are great benefits for both them and the children. It is clear in this clip that this educator had time to be with the child, which probably means that her colleagues had picked up any slack. Your comments in the chat support the kind of summary that we got from the video, which gave us clues about the educator's belief system, attitudes, thoughts, feelings and skills that influenced the relationship with this child and her interaction in this moment. First, she assumed that this behaviour had a cause or was communicating something rather than thinking the child would get over it. And she prioritised the moment with the child rather than leaving the child to calm down by herself. She separated the child from the behaviour rather than thinking of her as something maybe just a whinger. She was comfortable about physically and emotionally comforting the child. And she obviously knew and could tune into the child and knew to gently persist until the child accepted her comfort. She obviously knew about emotional literacy and knew to wait until the child calmed before talking about the problem. She made sure the story of what happened was told. She accepted the child and the child's feelings and acknowledged them. She helped the child to develop emotional literacy by helping her to recognise, name, understand and express her emotions. She knew how to stay calm herself while calming the child and did not show any evidence that the child's behaviour pressed her buttons in any way. To sum up, she was really, as Circle of Security would say, she was bigger, stronger, wiser, but kind at the same time. And in the next slides, Janelle's going to talk about the 3 other focus areas demonstrated in the video, which link closely to the kind of research we're talking about, and with a little bit more detail about this.
So, why is connecting so important? We could see the educator really persisting in her efforts to comfort this child's behavioural reaction, and possibly the background knowledge of the educator indicate that whatever had happened was really, really important to this child. This little girl's downstairs brain was clearly dominant. She looked stuck, unable to think, make decisions, or to transition to the comfort of the educator. Initially, she looked like she just couldn't move. The educator at this moment just wanted to comfort her, hardly thinking about brain research at all. The educator bobbed down to her level, asked permission to help, talked to her, validated and labelled her possible emotion of being sad, and stroked her back. She was respectful of the child's inability to accept comfort early, but knew to stay with her until she was. The child would have been responding to the educator's closeness, tone of voice, calm state, time allowed to process, and the educator staying and being with her till she's ready. They connected both physically and emotionally. Cuddles activate oxytocin, that chemical that reduces the effects of stress and distress. You know yourself how much better you feel after a hug when you're distressed. Did you notice how the educator matched the intensity of the child's hug at the beginning? You could also see how this intensity reduced as the child calmed, and how the educator matched the child's state while supporting her to relax. Did you sense that the child trusted the educator and that they had a positive relationship? The educator was really tuned into this little girl and her emotional needs and followed the child's lead beautifully throughout this interaction. It's really important to connect in a way that the child knows that you get it, that you understand the feeling or emotion being experienced, and that the child feels felt. The educator did exactly that when she validated and labelled the child's emotions, followed her lead, matched the intensity of her emotions, and used her voice as opposed to her words to indicate that she understood. Once the connection is made, a bridge to the upstairs left brain starts being constructed. She'll be able to use logic to make sense of what's happening emotionally. This child will then be able to use all areas of her brain in an integrated way. Dan Siegel helps us to remember this by coining the phrase, connect, then redirect. Now let's see how this educator assisted in developing this child's emotional literacy. Goldman, and his book is in our reference list as well, he reminds us that to be able to regulate or manage emotions, first you need to raise awareness. By recognising, understanding and labelling the emotion, you can't regulate something that you're not aware of. We saw how this educator assisted this child to calm down and manage her emotions by using emotional literacy. By using emotional language, this little girl will recognise, then understand how she's feeling. Hearing the name of the emotion while you're experiencing it provides the label for what you are feeling and helps with that recognition and understanding. But the very first step is to connect with her. Part of that was responding to the educator's voice and presence. She could not respond to the actual words initially. Once the little girl's distress lessened, she was able to hear the words. The beginning of this interaction was all about the feelings and the emotions, what happens before and underneath the words in her right hand brain, right hemisphere brain. Developing emotional literacy adds a richness to the left brain of this little girl that will help support her emotional right brain. Cuddling with the educator released that chemical oxytocin that will help grow connections throughout the brain, including connecting the left, right, upstairs and downstairs. As her emotional literacy and general language develop, she will increasingly be able to use language and thinking instead of behaviour to manage her emotions. And Dan Siegel helps us to remember this important element by saying, name it to tame it. Name it helps to manage and control it. So to tell the story, when you feel felt with an attuned adult, then you can tell the story. You become relaxed and calm enough to be able to access that linguistic, logical part of the brain and connect it with the emotional brain and the memory, and match the event and how you felt about it. Telling the story, Dan Siegel says, helps you make sense of what's happened. Telling the story can only happen once the child is calm, as you saw in the video. You could see how quickly she settled once she told her story. You know that she settled as she stopped crying. She's facing away from the educator and she's ready to focus on the next part of her day. Telling the story is a little bit like resolving the issue, bringing it all together. This happened, so this happened, and I felt. Once it's sorted, then you can move on. Remember that it's now recognised that mental health issues of adults can be rooted in the unresolved challenges of young children. And this is one way to help resolve those challenges, is telling the story, linking all the bits together.
Okay, thank you, Janelle. Let's now take a poll on emotions and hear about your input a little bit. Look at the list of emotions that you can see on your screen and mark those emotions that you think you are likely to speak to children about. And at the same time, think about the age that you might start these conversations. Then you can put that in the chat if you wish. And there might be other ones we haven't listed. We couldn't put in all the ones we could think of, that you might want to add in the chat. But let's have a look and see what responses straight away come up as things that you're likely to be talking to children about.
We had an interesting conversation, didn't we, about which ones we should list?
Yes.
When
once again, we can see that a strong feeling, angry, is coming up.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
From a lot of people. And sometimes we wonder whether we talk more about the negative emotions than the positive ones.
Mm.
And a number of programs suggest that the ratio should be at least 5 to 1 in favour of positive.
Mm.
And it would be interesting to sometimes analyse our interactions and to know what that ratio really is.
Yeah.
That's interesting. 93%.
Mm. Happy is quite high, which is good as well. But anxious is high, which is, I think, people are really aware now that anxiety in young children is a growing problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, that awareness is being raised, isn't it?
Mm.
Lots of people are adding lots of different emotion words in the chat too. And like we said, there were lots more that we wanted to put in.
If we only could have 8 items. But I think what it brings out is the fact that there are lots of emotions that you could be talking with children about, and they should become, hopefully, part of our everyday language with children.
Oh.
And that builds what Janelle was talking about as their emotional literacy.
Oh.
And
because children experience all of these feelings, all
they
of
do,
these emotions. Yeah.
And we know now, years ago we thought that they didn't, but we know that even very quite young children are starting to feel a much wider range of emotions than previously was thought possible. And they need to make sense of these, so they need that language of emotions to help them do that.
Yeah.
And as they grow up,
we'll finish off, but someone's just talked about the degrees of emotion, so you can be a little bit angry, or
yes.
In our house we talk about being big angry, tiny angry. Yeah.
Good idea. Mm.
All right,
okay.
Can we stop the poll?
Yes, thank you. Okay, well, now I'm going to talk about the kind of journey where the children need to make from a very primarily reflexive kind of response, like that wailing and whining, the little baby, and exploding in a tantrum that we know well in very small children, and running around with excitement. How we help them move on that journey to be much more reflective. So what is it that we actually do? And so far we've talked about understanding emotions and their significance, and we've seen an educator in action. We talked about ways in which she supported a distressed child to manage her emotions and highlighted some ideas from that. But now we're going to talk a little bit more about the role of adults and what they have to do to help this journey progress. And before we have a look at our top tips. So we know that at least 4 processes underlie children's growing ability to manage their emotions. The first one is maturation, what's happening in the body. The second one is temperament, what we inherit, and the general development status that we have as a child. Third, the parent socialisation and the kind of environmental support the child gets. And then fourth, how much educators emphasise emotional education. Now, those of you who are parents will be very aware that the temperament a child is born with plays a significant part in their emotional development. There is much in the research literature to show that babies are born with distinct temperaments which affect how they respond emotionally and behaviourally to external events. So the role of the adult is to help a child to make the most of their inherited capacities, not to try and change them, but to accept whatever their temperament may be. Heredity may define temperament, but experience shapes it. And how caregivers respond to a child's temperament-driven behaviours can either reinforce or modify elements of a child's sensitivities. And while educators can't change maturation, temperament and family influence, there's considerable evidence to show that we can have a major impact on children's ability to learn, to manage their emotions and responses by our modelling, our explicit teaching, and showing them how to learn how to manage emotions. We know that learning how to manage emotions is both caught and taught. And if we also work closely with parents, we have the opportunity to join together in supporting the child on their journey. Referring to adults as emotion coaches is helpful, I think, because if we consider what an effective coach does, it brings to mind actions like tuning into an individual, connecting with their internal states and reading their signals of need, encouraging, giving empathic feedback and at-the-elbow support as it's required, understanding the stage of development the individual is at, and matching expectations to that knowledge, providing models, and starting with a strong scaffold, which is gradually removed when it's no longer required. The journey starts with the total dependency of a baby on an adult and gradually moves towards the child playing more and more of a role in self-management. How successful this journey is will depend on how well adults have supported or coached the child along the way. A very big responsibility. The use of descriptive commenting, for example, this term, which is described very well in the book Incredible Teacher, is a very effective coaching strategy because it is a form of commentary in which the adult enters a child's internal and imaginary world, narrates their ideas, thoughts, feelings and interests, rather like a sportscast, and this helps them to organise their feelings and make sense of their experience. And when we are faced with challenges that the emotional behaviour of young children can bring, it's really tempting to search for quick fixes and one-size-fits-all approaches. Barbara Kaiser stresses that we'll only be able to assist a child when we accept that our approach has to be tailored to fit a particular child's needs and be based on careful, thoughtful observation and empathic interaction. The more challenging a child's behaviour is, the more we have to search for their underlying needs. In addition to what we've already talked about, some examples of what adults can do are give more attention to positive feelings than negative feelings we mentioned before. Acknowledge individual developmental differences in children's ability to regulate emotions. Not all can do it as well as each other. Use games, activities, drama, puppets and stories to help children understand their own and others' emotions. And do things like use a mnemonic flow, capital F, capital L, capital O, to guide us in action when a child is distressed. Talk about feelings first, that's the F. Then explain the limits, that's the L. And then talk about the opportunities. And constantly ask ourselves when we're interacting with children, what might this child be thinking or feeling, not just what is this child doing? And this is leading us now to the first of our top tips. Janelle would, oh sorry, beg your pardon, I'm talking about the next slide. Okay, so these are our 3 top tips. Being with, talking about emotions and organising emotions. And each of these headings represents a grouping of evidence-based strategies. And we will just select some aspects of each of these to discuss in the next few slides. And we think that this framework gives you these provide a framework of 3 broad areas which can be a useful working model for educators. So Janelle's going to outline tips 1 and 2, and I will follow up with tip 3.
Thanks, Penny. So our first tip is called, number 1 top tip is called being with. This term is coined by the Circle of Security people and is a little bit more complex than it sounds. And it's a little bit like connect and redirect. Being with is grounded in the fact that babies are born to be in a relationship. Babies' well-being is promoted when they are with a caregiver who provides comfort, protection and interaction. This is how we is now supported by what we know about the brain. It's the relationship, the positive responsive relationship that promotes healthy brain development so babies can grow into mentally and physically healthy adults. Relationships involve adults who are bigger, stronger, wiser and kind, on the Circle of Security again. We saw this in the video when the educator used voice and action that showed she was bigger, stronger, wiser and kind. She knew what was best and took charge so that child felt safe and secure. The child accepted her comfort and responded by calming down. The educator tuned into the child's needs by comforting her and following her lead until she was ready to explore her world again when she wanted to play with the truck. The educator showed the child she was emotionally available for her when needed. She responded to the child in a timely manner. The child felt she was known as an individual and that her needs were accepted. The educator also actively assisted the child in managing her emotions in this moment in ways that will also be helpful for her in the future. You know yourself what it's like when you seek comfort and the comforter tries to solve your problem for you or tell you what to do, when all you want is for somebody to be there with you. Imagine what it would have been like for this child if time out was used, or if she wasn't noticed by an educator. The idea of time out has become a contentious issue. Most people would agree that the situation in today's video is a clear case for time in. It seems the original idea behind time out, which was originally designed for children to have quiet time to reflect, has altered. This deserves time for a much bigger conversation than we have today. But I do know if there is a relationship glitch, whether time out is used or not, the most important thing to do is to reconnect with the child to re-establish that relationship as soon as possible. Number 2 top tip is talking about emotions. We've already seen many examples in this video, and those points are mentioned here again on this slide. But I'm going to focus on 2 aspects that we didn't mention previously. The early warning signs and narrating the interactions of self and others. Remember we talked about the downstairs brain and brain connections? These connections mean emotions can also cause bodily signs like perspiring, sweaty palm, butterflies in the tummy, feeling nervous, going to the toilet, wobbly legs and so on. Talking about these signs with children and what they mean can help children to identify when something may not be okay early, before they can even think about it. It can also be helpful to differentiate thoughts, feelings, sensations like butterflies in the tummy, and images like pictures in your head. This again raises self-awareness and can help a child organise their internal world. Dan Siegel will tell you more about this. Narrating the interaction of self and others is all about telling a child or children how they or other children are playing. Some people call this sports casting. it could go something like this. So you could say, Mary's digging in the sand. Tom's watching Mary. Tom's showing Mary his bucket. Maybe he's giving Mary the bucket. Mary's smiling. She looks happy about having a turn of the bucket, and so on. And the educator could do this while sitting on the edge of the sandpit, at a table, in the block, watching children play a ball game. And this can really help children with a verbal structure for what they're doing while they're doing it or watching it, developing more than just their social emotional literacy in a way that shows they are seen, heard, understood and valued. And now Penny's going to talk about the last topic.
Thanks, Janelle. Young children feel intense emotions, and they are at a very early stage in beginning to manage these. Feeling out of control can be very scary and negatively affect a child's learning and their interaction with others. As someone recently suggested in a radio interview, young children have very big engines but small steering wheels. Children need to know that all feelings are okay and that there is nothing wrong with strong emotions. All emotions are normal, but there are different ways of expressing these, and they have a choice in how they do this. Educators need to provide children with practical ways to help them to organise their emotions and coach them in using these. That is why we have chosen this as our third top tip. In our slide, we've included a number of labels which identify types of strategies that will help children to organise their emotions, but this is not an exhaustive grouping. We haven't put everything in. I will touch on one or two of these, particularly wait time and self-soothing. So wait time, or learning how to control impulses and delay gratification, is one of the most important organisers of emotions that we can teach children. Daniel Goleman, in his groundbreaking book about emotional intelligence, said, "There is perhaps no psychological skill more fundamental than resisting impulse. It is the root of all emotional self-control, since all emotions, by their very nature, lead to one or another impulse to act." In the well-known marshmallow experiment, 4-year-olds used a number of tactics to help them resist eating a marshmallow put in front of them in order to be given a second one when the adult returned. But some found this much, much harder than others. Follow-up as adults of the children who were most successful indicated that the capacities they demonstrated early continued to be an advantage throughout life and work. Although some children find this harder than others, we can, by modelling, coaching and explicit teaching, help them to become more skillful in controlling impulses and waiting. I've recently been involved in assisting a 2-year-old with things he can do to help himself wait instead of wailing, such as counting, clapping, singing, tapping, and self-talk like, "I can wait, I can wait." And we've had quite a lot of success with this, surprisingly. Of course, when emotions are raging, we move to a different level of wait time and have to learn how to self-soothe and calm strong feelings before the more thinking-based strategies like self-talk can work. The turtle technique has been shown to be highly successful in assisting children to calm strong feelings. In this technique, children are taught to stop, take 3 deep breaths, and like a turtle, withdraw into their shell and only come out when they feel calm. The use of a puppet or a model shell they can get under is helpful in learning this technique. It is important to remember that in order for any technique like this to work, once strong emotions are aroused, it is essential to present, rehearse and role-play when children are calm and can access their thinking brain. When emotions are raging, children can neither learn nor organise their feelings. As they put these skills into practice, they'll need plenty of prompting, coaching, cueing and reinforcement. So being able to wait involves being able to self-soothe, and there are many techniques such as those which are part of mindfulness approaches which help children to do this. Deep breathing, recognising body cues and signals of emotion in themselves and others, relaxation exercises, positive imagery, use of a happy place and positive self-talk are just some of these. Parents and educators do many things to help children organise their emotions, and the journey is a complex one which involves something of a dance between adult and child. Perry Butterfield suggests that this is co-regulating, and this has a strong influence on early brain growth. A mother I know, when faced with the challenge of a 2-year-old who was finding going to bed difficult, consulted various books and tried strategies with little success. She realised that in many of the suggestions, the adult was doing all the work. So she decided to talk to the child about what things made him feel happy, and then playfully modelled lying down and closing her eyes and thinking about something that would make her feel happy. At bedtime, she prompted his recall of this and put him to bed. Amazingly, there was no crying, and over the intercom, she heard him practicing farting noises until he fell asleep. Since then, he has used many other examples to make himself happy, as he is often asked next morning what he thought about when he lay down and closed his eyes. Surprisingly, this self-soothing approach, which began as co-regulation, has continued to work well, and on occasions he has used it on his 12-month-old brother. Okay, so we've come to the end of our top tips, and so we would like you to think about moving forward and to thank you for your participation. But how are you going to move forward with this? It's not easy to have just a set. I mean, what some people want, I know, is a set of quick, 1, 2, 3, do this, and it'll all work. And I hope you've got from this webinar that it is a complex area. So what strategies do you currently use to help young children manage their emotions? And how successful do you think they are? What would you like to change? What is one idea you think you might take away from this webinar and use in your practice? And remember, you will receive those extra resources and things to help you on your journey. Thank you.
Okay. As Penny said, we've come to the end, and I'm not sure if we've got a little bit of time. We've got a couple of really interesting questions, and we probably can't get to all of them, but I'm just wondering whether I just throw to you, Penny, or Janelle, the question about ourselves as an adult and whether what we do with our emotions, because I think that's a really important part of the whole process. Would either of you just like to quickly comment on that?
Well, I think as adults, we're also human, and we can't avoid our own emotions, but hopefully as adults we've learned to manage our emotions. We're more skilled at managing our emotions most of the time. Sometimes that can be difficult as well. But I also don't know that we can protect children from adult emotions. No, we can't. We've got to let them experience our emotions as well, of course, within reason.
Yeah.
And I think one of the important things that both Dan Siegel and Circle of Security say is that if we do act in a way that is not particularly helpful, that we go back and repair with our child or with the children we work with. And it's not a loss of face or anything like that. There are ways we can say, oh, look, I was really angry then, and I'm sorry that I did whatever it might have been. And that is a learning process in itself for children.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, we've just clicked over, so just a final thought from both of you before we finish up.
Well, I think, as you said before, we're both passionate about this area, and I know I am, and I know that educators of young children can make such a difference in the lives of children by being emotion coaches and making emotions central to all learning. And that the more empathy a child sees, the more socially competent they become, because the brain is perceiving the empathy and the vagus nerve relaxes the body, and emotions are contagious, and empathy calms people down. And Mary Gordon spells this out wonderfully in her book, Roots of Empathy, Changing the World Child by Child. And that's something I like to remember.
Thanks, Penny. Janelle?
Yeah, my final thought is that we can't underestimate the importance of connecting first to help children and adults manage their emotions. We need to listen to others with our whole body and mind and look at the world through the eyes of the other person, then talk about it.
Yeah.
And knowing positive ways to manage emotions impacts all areas of our life.
Thanks, Janelle. And for me, it's being emotionally literate. And I think about literacy, and I think actually emotional literacy is probably as important as any other literacy. So I'd like to thank Janelle and Penny very much for their words of wisdom and their passion today. Also remind you that before you leave us, the webinar will stay open and you'll be able to complete an exit survey. Don't forget that if you are wanting to get a certificate for everybody who's watching with you, you'll need to record the names, the names and email addresses of all those people. Just to let you know too, it'll be about a week before the recordings are available and the resources are available. So, but you'll get an email both with your certificate and then a separate email with confirmation or letting you know that the recording and other resources are available. But don't forget, in the meantime, go to our website if you're interested in looking for anything, and we really look forward to continuing the conversation. Look out for some blogs perhaps, or on our Facebook page for some continued information and conversation about this really interesting area about emotion. So thank you so much again for joining us. And also, if you didn't get a chance to watch the video, you can go online to watch that as well. So thanks for joining us, and we'll say goodbye. Thank you.